encircling gloom. Lead thou me on, the night is dark, and I am far from home. Lead thou me on, keep thou my feet, I do not ask to see the distant scene, will step enough for me.
In Newman's manuscript chronological notes, this entry occurs. September 25th, Littlemore commemoration. Pusey administered sacrament, H.W. came. I preached number 604, my last sermon. There is no reference to this occasion in Newman's famous apologia, and yet this is one of his most dramatic sermons given as an Anglican divine. Robert Gregory, afterward Dean of St. Paul's, attended the service. The following appeared in his autobiography.
I had never realized the full meaning of the words, "He lifted up his voice and wept." But then, there was not a dry eye in the church, excepting those of the preacher. Dr. Pusey and some others sobbed aloud, and the sound of their weeping resounded through the church.
Edward Bellicis, then a barrister, later a sergeant at large, described the event in a letter to his wife.
The service was at 11, and as usual, the chapel was decorated with flowers upon the altar. In the windows above, over Mrs. Newman's tomb, and on every seat on both sides of the middle aisle, chiefly dahlias, passion flowers, and fuchsias. They were the most beautiful as well as elegantly arranged. The service commenced with a procession of the clergy and the school children from the schools of the chapel, chanting a psalm as they walked. The officiating clergy were Newman, for the last time, Pusey, Copeland, and Bowles. There was a communion, and Newman preached his farewell sermon. It is no easy thing to convey to you any adequate impression of the whole scene. The crowd of friends from all parts, the half-mournful greeting, the extreme silence of the chapel, though crowded till chairs were obliged to be set in the churchyard. The children with their new frocks and bonnets, Newman's parting gift. I did not see Newman speak to anyone before the service. The sermon I can never forget. Newman's voice was low, but distinct and clear, and his sermon, well, it was a subject that was half-veiled complaint and remonstrance of the treatment which drove him away. Dr. Pusey consecrated the elements in tears, and once became entirely overcome and stopped altogether. However, nothing I can say to you can give you the remotest idea of the sorrowfulness or solemnity of the scene.
25 years after that culminating moment in Newman's Anglican career, an Oxford professor remembered
the aching blank, the awful pause which fell on Oxford when that voice ceased, and we knew that we should hear it no more. It was as when, to one kneeling by night in the silence of some vast cathedral, the great bell tolling solemnly overhead had suddenly gone still.
The sermon was entitled The Parting of Friends. It spoke of the loss of the Oxford Fellowship of John Keble, Edward Pusey, Richard Hurrell Froude, and perhaps of no less a companion, the loss of Newman's home in Oriel College, Oxford. Newman began his sermon with a line from Psalm 104.
Man goeth forth to his work and to his labor until evening.
Here is the opening paragraph.
When the Son of Man, the firstborn of the creation of God, came to the evening of mortal life, he parted with his disciples at a feast. He had borne the burden and heat of the day, yet when wearied with his journey, he had but stopped at the well's side and asked a draught of water for his thirst. For he had meat to eat which others knew not of. His meat was to do the will of him that sent him and to finish his work. I must work the works of him that sent me, he said, while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Thus passed the season of his ministry. And if at any time he feasted with Pharisee or publican, it was in order that he might do the work of God more strenuously. But when the evening was come, and he sat down with the 12, he said unto them, with desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. He was about to suffer more than man has ever suffered or shall suffer. But there is nothing gloomy, churlish, violent, or selfish in his grief. It is tender, affectionate, social. He calls his friends around him, though he was a Job among the ashes. He bids them stay by him and see him suffer. He desires their sympathy. He takes refuge in their love. He first feasted them, and sung a hymn with them, and washed their feet. And when his long trial began, he beheld them and kept them in his presence, till they in terror shrank from it.
Newman continued, quoting David,
All things come of thee, for we are strangers before thee, and sojourners, as were all our fathers. Our days on earth are as a shadow, and there is none abiding. All is vanity. Vanity of vanities, and vexation of spirit.
Nonetheless, Newman felt the loss of all the things of earth he loved best.
It was a glad time when we first met here. Many of us now present recollect it. Nor did our rejoicing cease, but was renewed every autumn as the day came around.
In Loss and Gain, Newman's fictional rehearsal of the great change his joining the Catholic Church made in his life, he speaks of his feeling about the beginning of school year at Oxford.
The first day of Michaelmas term is the brightest day of the year. Charles rejoiced to see his old Oxford again. The porter had acknowledged him at the gate. The scout smiled and bowed as he ran up the worn staircase and found a blazing fire to welcome him. The coals crackled and split and threw up a white flame in strong contrast with the newly blackened bars and hobs of the grate. Shining copper kettle hissed and groaned under the internal torment of water at a boiling point. The chimney glass had been cleaned, the carpet beaten, the curtains fresh glazed. A tea tray and tea commons were placed on the table. Besides a battle paper, 2 or 3 cards from tradesmen who desired his patronage, and a note from a friend whose term had already commenced.
His friend, Dr. Bloxam, recalled in later life Newman's favorite room in college.
You entered from the staircase by a door in the corner of the room. On your left were the 2 windows looking into the quadrangle. Opposite to them, 2 windows looking into Merton Lane. Between the latter were engravings of St. Christopher and the 3 different portraits of Charles I in one print. On the side of the door were bookcases filled with folio volumes of the Fathers. Opposite to these was the fireplace, over which was a small portrait of his mother, and a crucifix, from which, however, the figure had been removed. In the center of the room was a table covered with books and papers. Newman's own chair was on one side of the fireplace near the table.
Directly over Newman's rooms were those of Richard Hurrell Froude. Lord Branchford described Froude as having
more of the undergraduate in him than any Don whom I ever knew. Absolutely unlike Newman in being always ready to skate, sail, or ride with his friends. And, if in a scrape, not pharisaical as his means of getting out of it. I remember, for example, climbing Merton Gate with him in my undergraduate days when we had been out late boating or skating. Luxury, show, and even comfort he despised and denounced. Self in every form he could believe in. Most of all, in a gentleman, particularly one of the good Devonshire family.
Tom Mosley said of Froude that
his intercourse with earth and nature seemed to cut through them like uncongenial steel, rather than mix and mingle with them. Yet the polished blade smiled as it went through. The grace and spirit with which he adorned this outward world and seemed to an undiscerning eye to love it were but something analogous in him to the easy tone of men in high life, whose good nature to their inferiors is the result of either their disinterested benevolence or of sublime unconcern.
Richard Hurlford's undergraduate mentor had been John Keble. Keble had grown up in the patriarchal atmospheres of his father Thomas Keble's parsonage, where, after the old fashion, he received his entire education up to his 16th year when he entered the university. His whole life was spent in the sacred seclusion of the old English family life, among people enjoying a perfect harmony of taste and opinion. In his autobiography, Newman wrote of him,
Keble was a man who guided himself and formed his judgments not by processes of reason, by inquiry, or by argument, but, to use the word in a broad sense, by authority. What he hated instinctively was heresy, insubordination, resistance to things established, claims of independence, disloyalty, innovation, a critical, censorious spirit.
Another of Keble's students, Isaac Williams, described in his memoirs his teacher's effect upon him.
It was to me quite strange and wonderful that one so distinguished should always ask one's opinion, as if he was younger than myself. And one so overflowing with real, genuine love in thought, word, and action was quite new to me. I could scarcely understand it. To find a person always endeavoring to do one good, as it were, unknown to oneself, and in secret, and even avoiding that his kindness should be felt and acknowledged as such. This opened up upon me quite a new world. Religion a reality, and a man wholly made up of love, with charms of conversation, thought, and knowledge beyond what one had experienced among boyish companions. This broke in upon me at once.
Christopher Dawson tells us in his book, The Spirit of the Oxford Movement,
When Froude lay dying, he compared himself to the murderer who had done one good act in his life, and said that one thing he had done was to bring Keble and Newman together and make them understand one another. For the contact of these two minds and wills in the medium of Hurl's sympathy generated a new current of spiritual activity which transformed the religious life of England.
in the prophetic poetry of the Lyra Apostolica, the friends expressed their faith that movements do not come by committees. The fire spark must be passed on from man to man. It was a fight to be conducted by friends. Keble recited,
Angel of England, who might he withstand? For the spoiled and trampled church deny the suit in heaven's high courts. Might one true band of holy brethren, breathing English air, be found, their cross in thine array to bear, and for their mother cast earth's dreams away.
and Newman composed the harmony.
These are the chosen few, the remnant fruit of largely scattered grace. God sows in waste to reap whom he foreknew of man's cold race, counting on wheels perverse in his clear view of boundless time and space. He waits by scant return for treasures given to fill the thrones of heaven.
Keble preached their crusade, later referred to as the Oxford Movement, in a sermon entitled On National Apostasy.
The signs of this weariness are all around. One of the most alarming, as a symptom, is the growing indifference in which men indulge themselves to other men's religious sentiments. Under the guise of charity and toleration, we are come to this pass, that no difference in matters of faith is to disqualify for our approbation and confidence, whether in public or domestic life. Can we conceal it from ourselves that every year the practice is becoming more and more common, but trusting men unreservedly in the most delicate and important matters without one serious enquiry whether or not they hold the principles which made it impossible for them to be loyal to their Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier? Are not offices conferred, partnerships formed, intimacies coordinated, what is almost too painful to think of? Do not parents commit their children to be educated, Do they not encourage them to intermarry in houses on which apostolic authority would rather teach them to set a mark as unfit to be entered by a faithful servant of Christ?
Froude joined the fight.
Calvinism, amidst all its errors, had two truths. Though its articles of faith were erroneous, yet it asserted that a true faith was necessary to salvation. And though its discipline was a human invention, yet it asserted that church authority was from God. Against these two truths of Calvinism were forged the doctrines of Arminius and Erastus, the former asserting that mere opinions were matters of indifference, and the latter that the church was a mere creature of the state.
Newman added his own lucid prose and psychological penetration to the dispute.
The great and ancient power, the Church Catholic, which dates her origin from the first preaching of the gospel, which was founded by the apostles, and which claims to be indissolubly connected with its fortunes, has been taken captive by her enemies, blinded, and sent to servile employments, to make men good citizens, and to promote the enlightenment and comfort of the world, except when she is brought out of the prison house on some great pageant to make sport, to invest the institutions of earth with something of a religious character, and to pay homage to its mighty men as her creators and governors.
Party spirit ran high, and the enthusiasm among churchmen swept the country along in its tide. Tom Mosley claimed that
nobody was too humble in intellect or in clerical position not to be invited and enrolled as an ally. Men survive or have but lately passed away, who can never have known what it was to share a glory and a greatness except at that happy time.
at the height of their power, the zenith of their influence, the crest of their flame, in the full blossoming of their friendship, Froude's poor health gave way to terminal illness. Newman's anguish revealed itself in a letter to his friend who had gone to Barbados for his health.
It is impossible that some way or other you are not destined to be the instrument of God's purposes. Though I saw the earth cleave and you fall in, or heaven open and a chariot appear, I should say just the same. God has 10,000 posts of service. You might be of use in the central elemental fire. You might be of use in the depths of the sea.